welcome to another edition of Reptile Fight Club. I'm Justin Julander, your host, and with me is always, or mostly always.
I am more always now than mostly always.
That's true. It's only been a couple times.
Yeah, I'm back.
All right.
Wow, you fall off like one or two times, and you just become Mr. Undependable to Justin. I see. I got you.
Hey, you gotta earn that, man.
I mean, it is fair. You've covered for me more times than I've covered for you. So, but I always say that's why you're the host and I'm the co-host.
Well, and we are joined today by another master of podcasting, Dr. Zach Loughman.
Yeah.
So how's it
Hi,
going,
y'all.
Zach?
It's going well.
Welcome back.
Yes.
I mean, we've had Zach before, so we're trying to give him a better topic this time. It's a little easier to pick either side. So last time we discussed UV light, and that was he got the con side of that, which is kind of a little harder to defend.
Yeah, I had to give myself 50 lashes later that night when I got home. So.
Yeah.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
And the co-host of the podcast Clubrids and Clubroid
yes,
Radio.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Part of NPR, just
Good
like
stuff.
yours.
Yeah, we're all under the same little family. Just having a little family reunion here. So,
and a busy herp man of science.
Yeah, I try.
Yeah.
We'll see how this goes tonight.
Yeah.
I got faith.
I think it'll be a lot of fun for sure. Yeah. Well, my last clutch of snake eggs hatched. I got a 20 hypo brettles. So
God, the boatload of brettles.
What we can do with those. Yeah, I'm waiting for them to shed. There's some nice looking ones in there, but yeah, they look kind of shiny and different until they're first shed. So
yeah, I saw Dr. Zach's son also posted up some brettles too.
Yes. Little baby Lucas.
Yeah. Lucas. That's Lucas, yes. In case anybody didn't catch who Dr. Zach's son is.
Why are you following his son? That's
no, come now.
Yeah. Lucas is doing some good stuff with brettles. For sure.
He's doing some good stuff. Period.
And Aspodites. He's buying up all the Aspodites in California, all the Womas, and he's got a few blackheads. So
he's going to have a problem soon. He just doesn't realize it yet.
Yeah.
So he knows what he's doing.
So you have. Oh yeah, for sure. No, most definitely. I mean, you can see the success that he's having across the range of different reptiles that he's keeping, and see that he is he's top notch. He knows what he's doing. So
yeah.
Yep.
I guess perhaps the biggest news in my life right now is the finally getting a copy of the more complete carpet python in my hands. So that's really nice to have.
It's a gigantic book you got there, sir.
It's a little large. Yeah.
I can say,
so
seeing it in person, I was kind of like, Jesus, this thing's a tome.
Yeah, right?
Yeah.
And just in case anybody wondered, when Dr. Zach and I came on, he was reading it in front of us to just to be a bragger. Yes, just to be a bragger.
Make us drool
about
bit.
having a copy in his hand. Yes, exactly. So, and it worked. It worked. It was well done. Well done.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I'm glad it landed. But Bob sent Nick and I both 2 copies each. So it's can't do much with those, but it's fun.
Did you find yourself, I saw that Nick was emotional. Did you find yourself emotional when you finally got your?
I wept for hours. I was pretty excited. I can't say that I was too emotional. I don't know. It's kind of one of those things where you've worked so hard at it and studied it so much, and you're just staring at the thing for years, and then you just kind of want to get away from it a little bit. So, but holding it in your hand is a different thing. That's really exciting, and seeing it on the printed page there's just something different than looking at it digitally. To hold. Well,
it's the breadth and scope of the work versus the reward of the final product, right? You do a paper or whatever it is you're talking about, and you just want to get away from it after you're done. You're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. Get this away from me. But gosh, to have a book that will go out and anger every Australian carpet python fan over in Australia. What could be better? You know,
I've already got that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw some hate fare already from I think it was just over the poster too. It wasn't even they haven't even read the book yet.
Well,
so.
the poster shows the kind of the genetic layout that we went with because the data supported that. You know, that's the best thing we could come up with, the data. So, you know, it's not necessary. We can just kind of push the blame to the data. Isn't that
that's
what you
exactly
do?
What you do.
Like, it's not us. It's just what the data says. So
don't hate me. Hate the data.
Yeah. I was talking to Nick today. We were saying, you know, we'll throw out a challenge there. If any Australians are really upset about it and want to come debate it with us, come on Reptile Fight Club. We'll take you on.
Yeah, I'm down for that one. I want to see that.
We can defend what we've come up with here. Sure. I guess if we lose the coin toss, maybe we'll have to argue the other way. But
well, I mean, I guess, you know, the question becomes like, okay, so you disagree. So where is your evidence to support your disagreement of this? And a lot of it is from what I was reading based on old physical, phenotypical ways that they were previously classified. So people are just kind of holding on to the old in spite of what the new says, which is kind of leads us into our topic a little bit. You know, I feel like it'll fit well.
How well do we roll with scientific changes in the hobby or
change,
in general?
Change in general, right?
I don't know. I love that Sunny in Philadelphia bit where they're talking about science, bitch. Yes. And they slap it over Newton's face or whatever. He was wrong. And he was the leading scientist of his day. Yeah. Good stuff. Well, I was curious about that, Zach. You know, as an actual in the flesh taxonomist, you know, what do you think? What subspecies? Like, what do you need to call something a subspecies or even a species?
I'm more on. Now I'm going to get murdered. But I'm
dragging you down, man. I'm drowning. Okay. I'm just going to pull you down with me.
Stand on this. I know a lot of people are pro subspecies, but I am definitely. The data that's coming out of the world of evolution and molecular phylogeography and zoogeography and molecular phylogenetics and systematic, like all of it just points more and more and more towards subspecies being somewhere between like barely legitimate and absolute hot garbage. And there's, that's the continuum. So I'm on team. Yeah, I mean, I looked at the poster and I believe that you were promoting more species level stuff. Is that correct?
I mean, we tried to retain some semblance of what's been proposed and what's been utilized and things like that. So, it's just our take and just kind of how we parse out different groups. But I mean, if I were a real taxonomist, I would probably know what I was doing in this, and maybe we would be confident in saying these are species. But I think there's definitely some breaks where you could say, this is probably a species. And I mean, they always kind of go back to that. Well, if it can interbreed, if populations can interbreed, they're not full species.
But when we look at,
I don't know, that's not the case in the bird world.
It's just not like that whole idea of you've got to have reproductive communities that are isolated from each other, and there's no interbreeding at all, and it's that kind of Ernst Mayr view of what a species is. There's just so much evidence now that we actually have the ability to get a genome like in rapid time. And we're not just looking at one gene; we're looking at like the whole thing. And then you end up looking, this closely related taxa, we've got a genetic influence of it in here, and then there's another taxa in here, and I don't know. I just am leaning more and more and more towards. Either getting rid of subspecies for the most part or just making it a case-by-case basis. Now, I will say this. I come from the world of invertebrates with the crayfish because that's where I'm the systematics guy. And it's definitely a different type of dynamic. But I also have looked at the herp world of taxonomy recently and read papers and everything. With the book that I was writing on the South American guys, I did deep dives into systematics. I think there's going to be about 12 people on planet Earth that are going to enjoy reading that part of the book. And I enjoyed writing it, and I can say like I just think that there's something to be said for some of these taxa that in the past couple decades have been put out into the ether, and everybody just trashes it because it's new. But then again, you got to look at the genes, and you got to understand what the genes are saying, and you got to also, as a science guy or naturalist or just breeder, what they don't teach you in school is that everybody's kind of allowed to have their own definition of what constitutes a species. And as long as you produce the evidence to support your definition, you're good to go. And that's what leads to all this trouble. I hear on podcasts, and I hear people talk about all the time, like, this should be a consensus. There should be a magic percentage difference with genetics. And, that's just never going to happen.
I don't see how that makes any sense.
No.
Yeah.
So, and I can tell you, the first crayfish taxa I described was in 2009. And my definition of a species back then compared to what it is today in 2022, it's different. In fact, I have one I named that I am actually now kind of like, so do I get another paper when I get rid of that one? Like, literally, I don't know what to do because that's science, though. It's not static. It's dynamic.
Yeah.
And exactly. A lot of people don't like that. They learned it this way, and that is the way, and that's not really being scientific. So,
yeah. And I mean, it's hard when you go and find your favorite group has been reorganized and you don't agree with the way they did it, and you're like, but then again, that's also science to not have to be forced to agree with something just because somebody published it. You know, so
like the children's python paper.
That's his favorite.
That's a great example. My favorite. Yeah. It's I don't know. Taxonomy is kind of a fun thing. I guess it's, self-perpetuating. Like you said, you can describe a species and then undescribe it, 13 years later. Yeah. That's a good, it's kind of like, outbreaks, pandemics and virology. Anytime there's a pandemic, we're the only ones that get excited. That means more funding for the work we're doing. It's like it's sad that has to be the case. I guess. But, well, I guess I'm still kind of scratching my head about taxonomy. I still don't get what kind of benchmarks that are the important and I guess group to group or it can differ, and that's just frustrating, I guess, because you want it like this is the rule and this is how you do it, and they're just
I think that's what people want, right? Rules. In general, right? Yeah. They want that. No, this 5% genetic difference means it's a new species, and it's just like you can look across one species and or one genus or one family and see something different than in another family. So what the mark and the measure for one is not the mark and the measure for the other, and people just have a hard time with that. I think, and it's like because it makes it. It makes it very nipper almost. Everybody's doing their own thing, and it's like, oh, this is totally arbitrary, and you have to be a taxonomist to. And I'm sure if you're not a taxonomist, people are like, well, that's just taxonomist scientists making up their own bullshit to support their own bullshit, right? Like that's how people who don't agree see it,
And for the record, when the taxonomists get together, I think it's funny because we totally look at each other and go, that's totally bullshit. I've done that. Right. I've been on the receiving end of that. And you just
does it ever come to blows?
It doesn't come to blows because normally,
okay. So you're not as bad as herpes virus
exactly.
scientists.
If you think like snake,
really, I did not know
see that being crazy. They're molecular people. Molecular people are next level. No offense.
There's some crazy stuff that go. Yeah, some of these groups are just so emphatic about their ideas. It's come to blows at some point. I wasn't witness of that. The antiviral.
Herpes simplex 1 and herpes simplex 2.
I've heard stories of fist fights breaking out at conferences because they didn't agree with each other's conclusions.
That is the most sexually transmitted awesome thing I've ever heard. Oh my god, that's hilarious.
Fighting herpes.
Crayfish nerds aren't bad. Yes. We're not aggressive.
No. I could emphatically disagree with it.
Well, the other thing is there's also 4 of us on the planet. Like there's literally 4 crayfish taxonomists right now. that are working in North America.
And you all have different ideas.
And I am by far and away the youngest. So the running joke is that soon when the others like retire, I'm just going to inherit this kingdom that is all my own because there's nobody else that's freaking doing it. So that's when I'm going to really write.
And then you can make it all yours.
Like, can we call you the Cray Father then?
I don't know
the Cray
about
Father.
that. No.
You have to wait till they retire.
I know. Well, I'm waiting. I'm waiting.
I'm trying to pump out grad students on the crayfish side that can do the systematics. I have 2 currently, and I had a third that I was like, you want to get a PhD, you're doing taxonomy because we desperately need that. There's this whole thing called the taxonomic impediment where basically it's very difficult to, like, taxonomists are endangered species because there's no money in our work. Ironically, snake taxonomists are one of the few that can get the funding with venomous snakes because there's an evolutionary link to the venom, and with snake bite across the world, understanding who evolved, what venom system is allied with which clade and how to create antivenin and all that kind of stuff. There is some funding that you can get for that, but crayfish, nope.
That's the tricky thing too. Is so much of this depends on funding, and why is it not important to understand the world?
Yeah, biodiversity.
Classify things, and to identify species at risk and things like that. Yeah, it's
because we're destroying it.
Yeah,
that's true. It's probably the big companies are like, don't fund them. We don't want new species to have to impede our progress.
Exactly.
What money making?
No, I
have to spend $100,000 to mitigate a fucking new endangered species. I'm not doing that.
Yeah, no. I actually was working on a taxa that was going to. It ultimately became listed by Fish and Wildlife Service, and we were saying the entire time, like, this could be 2 species. This could be 2 species, because we had geographic evidence, genetic evidence, but we just literally didn't have enough animals in hand to do the morphology. And it wasn't until we got the money to go and do this thing called a species status assessment, which is when you go out and like create the big document that's necessary to list the taxa. That's what that was the first time I got the money to get to the museums to get the animals in hand. And then we got, we measured them, and sure enough, during that process, I ended up with some collaborators describing a second species, and holy hell, you want to talk about pissing people off. Midway through the endangered species listing process, you take the tax and split it even more. So you get a twofer out of it. But I'm still to this day defending that description because people think that I had some kind of motive, or we're just carving it up to keep it protected longer and all this kind of stuff. And it's not. I mean, the science is as sound can be. So. Anyway.
Sure. Yeah.
I mean, I guess if you couldn't back it up, like, that would be one thing. But I mean, like,
no, it's totally repeatable.
Whatever.
Anybody in a freshman like a sophomore, junior genetics class in biology can get the data off of GenBank and literally do the exact same analysis that shows that they're 2 different taxa. So,
how many species of crayfish are there?
There's about 700. When we're all done naming them, we'll have probably between 800 and 900. But what's really funny is, like, that seems like a lot, but there's like 2,500 species of snake. So it's actually a really manageable a group of animals.
And that's worldwide, 700.
Now in North America, we have about 400. So we really do kind of,
Okay. Hog the species over here. Is that just because more work's been done over here?
To a certain degree.
It's harder to get funding to study. I mean, I'm sure there's plenty of cryptic species out there. That
Australia has a genus. Australia is the other area, the other part of the world that has hyper.
They have some cool ones, colorful.
Yeah, we have we have a bunch of brown ones, and we've got the diversity. They have species that are like the size of footballs, covered in spines that make you bleed when you pick them up. Like they're much.
That sounds very Australian.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I tell everybody, including Scott Eifert, like, the first time I get to Australia, I'm going to have a stroke and die in the middle of a rainforest, because if I can see in one plane of one view a carpet python, a monitor, and one of these giant crayfish, my brain's not going to be able to take that. I'm just going to stroke out and die right then and there. Like, I can't imagine that.
Well, let's hope they don't all make an appearance at the same
time. They have to come individually because I just simply can't imagine.
So you can handle it.
Yeah, I won't be able to take it.
The statistical odds of hitting the trifecta.
Yes, that's my trifecta.
May save your life. Yeah,
that's cool.
So, anywho, but no, I have plans to get to Australia, but I've got plans to go to other places, so I have to kind of put that one in the bucket, like in the back burner, because it's one of those places I know that when I inevitably get there, I will be going back time and time again. So, because there's just too much there. So. Yeah. And I don't even want to talk about New Guinea, because New Guinea has a genus of crawdads called Carax. And there's a guy who every time he goes into New Guinea and comes out, he comes out with like 6 new species. And these are the species that are in the aquarium trade. They're like purple and neon blue and red. And they look like they came from like some alien plopped them down. They don't look like crayfish at all. And I also can't imagine, the probability of like a crocodile monitor, a maruki, or a blue tongue skink, one of their taipans, a green tree python, and a Carax. Just too much. I die.
Another another strokeable moment.
Yeah.
Nice.
That one seems a little less likely than the Australian one, even. So you're probably safe.
There's too much going on there. So.
Yeah. Well, and New Guinea's a little sketchy.
Very
anyway,
sketchy.
Going there.
You could die. You could die from getting killed.
You can get killed at the airport.
Never mind self-death. Yeah.
Watch out for those machete wielding, folks that set up roadblocks or whatever. Well, that's, taxonomy's, it's really an interesting thing, and it was kind of fun kind of doing a deep dive for this book into all the different biogeographic barriers and, drainage basins and all this stuff, and then looking at the genetic side. And there is a pretty good data set by Ciavaglia's group that puts out a bunch of different, shows some differences. At least I don't know how significant the differences are, and that's kind of difficult to for a layperson to understand, I guess. But it looks like, this is a different fork than this one, so that must mean they're different, that kind of thing. So it's hard to know how significant those differences are.
The issue with those trees that I don't think people understand, unless you're in this world, which when I learned this a couple years ago, my mind went like, boom, is that as you add more samples to the tree, you're adding more variation to the tree, and the tree's shape, topology, architecture, whatever you want to call it. It can you can literally add like one more sample and everything shifts. And so what my group does with the crayfish is when we get the tree and it shows like this tax is over here and this tax is over here, and it's all supposedly one thing, and we might be working with a new species or not a new species or whatever, is that we then always vet it against geography. So and that's where understanding what our planet's done for the past 3, 5, 10, 50 million years is kind of important.
Yeah.
But if the clades, that's what we call the groups, clayed out in a way that matches like a historical geography, or in my case, river systems that are here, there, and everywhere, and then you get a little bit of morphology, that little trifecta, that's done. At that, and I've also learned through doing this, you'll drive yourself crazy if you try to find perfection. You just have to call it and accept it and move on, and then deal with the repercussions when the paper comes out. So,
yeah, that seems to be the tricky thing is figuring that out. But it was in some of these. How they kind of laid out in Ciavaglia's work, didn't really make sense just looking at it. But then you get into some of the biogeographical, ideas or hypotheses, and you're like, okay, maybe that could be a reason for that, or that could explain that. So I don't know. Hopefully the book covers enough of our rambling thoughts that that people can see why we came up with what we did.
So I'm looking forward to it.
It's all fun. Yeah. All right. Well, Appreciate that. Yeah, we've gotten a pretty huge response. A lot of people putting their name on the list for a copy and stuff. So that's been nice to see. It's well received, and we'll hopefully get the bulk of the shipment in October. So we'll start shipping out books in October. But yeah, right now me and Nick are about the only ones that have copies. And I think Bob, I don't know if Bob's getting some himself or not. He's a man of few words. So we send him an email and he'll send us back a single sentence. And you're like, well, that answered one of my 5-6 questions, so, but yeah, it's good working with Bob, but yeah, the brevity of responses is a little, that's maybe the downside.
You're underwhelmed? Are you saying you're underwhelmed?
Oh, no. I mean,
who's got a book in their hand right now, Julender? Yeah. I don't want to hear it.
Yeah, my whining is falling on deaf ears. But.
Yeah.
And we, I'm a bit out of it. We dropped off my daughter at the airport to go to Costa Rica. She's going to go teach English out there. So
nice.
Hoping to get over and visit her so I can go chase some snakes out there. But, her flight left at 6, and so they said 3 hours early or whatever. So we left our house at 1:30, and then we got there and sat around for an hour waiting for the personnel for American Airlines to get to their station to check us in and stuff. So by the time we sent her on our way and got home, it was like 5 o'clock. So I got very little sleep last night. But so hopefully that won't mess up this the fight tonight. But
well, I spent all day in pre-semester mind-numbing meetings, so I'm there from a different way.
Oh yeah,
so.
Yeah. I had our department retreat yesterday. It was. Yeah, me and my colleague dragged over a couch. We had it up at a ski resort, but of course it's summer, so it's no skiing going on. But we dragged over a couch in the lodge, and it was a nice, comfy couch, and so we sat on that, and everybody else was on these,
nice.
The cafeteria benches. But my colleague fell asleep. So as soon as he started snoring, I kind of shook him awake. But yeah, the department head was giving him a hard time about falling asleep during her spiel. Yeah. So it was pretty entertaining. Yeah. The redeeming quality of the meeting was they had the cornhole.
Oh, nice.
So we could throw the bean bags in during breaks and stuff. It was pretty fun. Well, all right. We anything else going on?
I'm good.
Should we get to the fight here? Well, tonight we're talking about does herpetoculture have scientific merit? Is there anything going on that's useful to science in general, or are we just kind of playing with snakes in boxes? So I think it'll be a fun topic to discuss. So yeah, we'll go ahead and I guess Chuck and I will flip the coin to see who gets to fight you. So go ahead and call it, Chuck.
Tails.
It's heads, buddy.
Nice.
So yeah, I'll take this one. I think it's a fun topic I've been thinking about for a bit. So, all right, Zach, your turn. Let's see if you can
heads
get this one. It's heads.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I don't know which way I want to go with this.
So for the record, I went against my instincts.
Okay.
On my flip.
Sure,
I'm just telling you.
It's always easy to cut.
Of course. I listen. Believe me, don't believe me. I don't care. I'm just giving Zach time to think whichever way he wants to lambast you.
I'm going to.
Excited.
I was really hoping I didn't have to choose. I'm gonna take it does have scientific merit.
It does have scientific
and
merit.
We'll see how I do.
I'll go with the concept.
Yeah.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay. So can we throw one qualifier in there that I want to know? Are we talking about when we say herpetoculture, that includes zoos and universities, and fish and wildlife, or are we talking about private sector herpetoculture?
I don't know. What do you think? I mean, I kind of had it in mind as private.
I think that we should do private and take out
because I think it's a much stronger argument if you add zoos and that kind of thing. That makes it very easy.
And I might have chosen the wrong side, but that's okay. All right.
No.
All
right. Well, you choose the more positive side. Giving herpetoculture credit for where credit's due. Sure.
Where credit is due.
Maybe due. Yeah. All right. And as the winner of the coin toss, would you like to go first, or would you like to?
I always defer.
Okay. You pulling a Chuck, huh? All right. Okay. Well, so yeah, I think for, the most part or the majority of the time, the herpetoculture is focused on probably making money. So people, and I think the biggest evidence of that is the morph craze. Morphs have maybe a little bit of scientific merit associated with them, and some of the things that they can help us identify. But for the most part, morphs are just pretty variants that make people more money. And so they get excited when they hatch an albino or find some albino in the wild or something. Then they they get the dollar signs in their eyes and they take it back to their collection and breed them out. I think one evidence of that was the Mojave ball python, where they didn't do their due diligence and breed it out to the completion, to see if there was a super, which is the leucistic or kind of patternless ball python. And so they started selling the Mojave as a single gene, or just a single phenotype type animal. And then once they realized there was a super, they tried to go back and say, no, we want more money for the Mojave. And they're like, yeah, no, that doesn't work that way. You can't put Pandora's box back together. So
isn't that what you get for not doing your,
I guess so. Yeah. You do your due diligence or else you're going to lose out. But, so I think I'd maybe start out that way, that, the morph craze is kind of evidence that there's not much scientific merit to herpetoculture.
So, I am going to agree with you on that 100%. And I'm going to give a couple caveats here to cover my butt, because I definitely am on team private sector. If we really want to be taken seriously in the scientific community, needs to really reevaluate what the hell we're doing. And I can tell. And so I am acknowledging that. And I could argue both sides of this equally. But what I'm going to do is basically say there is a facet of the private sector, albeit the minority, in my opinion, not the majority, that has looked at herpetoculture and uses it for good. Not that people making double het purple hippopotamus, whatever the hells, are not doing this for good, but that aspect's the hobby. When I hear people talk about the hobby all the time. And when I hear people talk about the hobby, that's what I think. It's the morph craze. It's the line breeding things, the money making venture, oblivion. That is not in any way a scientific enterprise. So when I think about the scientific side, I actually rarely think about snakes, rarely think about lizards, and I go to the turtle people, because on many occasions I have given them props. Like the Turtle Room people and the people that do the Turtle Survival Alliance, because on that side we have private hobbyists that are part of a conservation initiative. Now you can argue conservation science, two different disciplines. I'm going to put conservation into the scientific discipline because there's the whole science of conservation biology. But the private sector in that, as far as the turtles are concerned, you get these confiscations. There's thousands of individual turtles collected at once. There's no way, given the red tape and the bureaucracy of AZA, that North American zoos can take that on. And at the same time, I don't know if we want North American zoos that have super rare taxa bringing into their collections 500 Asiatic box turtles that could have Lord knows what diseases. So in that regard, those turtles need to go somewhere. And it's been proven time and time again that the private sector is a good place for them to go. The reason why this works is because there's communication between all the entities. The agency folks with Fish and Wildlife and the various state level DNRs are communicating with the private sector people, and they're not necessarily viewing the private sector through this light of, that they're in this for money, but rather they're a resource that we can use for the animals. But to get to that point, it took an awful lot of trust building, and the way that the trust building happens is by it being able to show that you are capable of doing something in a structured, organized, repeatable way, and that's basically employing something like the scientific method. So And that particular facet of herpetoculture, which is what I'm going to grab onto with both hands for this whole thing.
Hold tight.
Yeah. That's where I feel herpetoculture can do science. But I'm going to flat out say, unfortunately, I don't really feel like we do the best job promoting that part of our hobby, discipline, whatever you want to call it. But it is science when we do it that way. So I'll end there.
I mean, I of course agree that the turtle folks do a bit more in regards to that. And yeah, that's a very valid point. And I think maybe that kind of leads me to my next concept or point or whatever, is that there's not a lot of cross talk. We have kind of our little niche nippers.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Little nippers running around, all these little nippers out there, where people don't really cross over. And, I've got, a fairly wide interest in reptiles, and I like to hear about different groups and different taxa. But, so I get a little bit of that crossover, and I think it's valuable because you see what the turtle groups are doing, or what the, different groups are doing. And you can see, oh man, they're way ahead of us in regards to their care, or their, what they're focused on and things like that, where, you look at the ball python group, and they're just focused on pretty snakes with paint jobs and fitting them into as small a rack as they can get away with, and still get viable clutches every year. And so, and that's not to say all ball python people do that, because I've heard of many ball python people kind of setting up their animals and maybe, making some observations of ball python activity and things like that. But for the most part, people just want to look at a pretty snake even in a tub, and I think that's another really good evidence that we're kind of moving away from that scientific aspect and moving more towards just what's going to make me money, and how can I get it faster. And just the fact that people want to breed within, 6 months to a year. If it won't breed for me, what's the point of it? I got to get rid of it and make space for stuff that's gonna cash in big for me. So, but when you have that lack of crosstalk, lack of sharing of ideas, you don't foster that scientific growth and the building of new ideas based on other groups. There could be some valuable things that you could learn from other areas, but you're so focused on one group and making money off that group that maybe you miss the bigger picture of it's not all about money, and there's things you can do in addition to making money to pay for your collections, food bill or whatever that you can be doing within the animals you care for.
Yeah. Now, once again, I am grabbing onto my minorities with both hands here. But there is a subset of private herpetoculture where they do go about this in a way where they're doing records, keeping records, and then making evidence-based decisions. And a lot of times those lone wolves that are willing to do that are the ones that actually crack the code on how to breed something. And then word gets out from them, and then that becomes the standard of herpetoculture for, the people that are then going to use that to go make money or make the double het stripe purple hippopotamus thing. So
love
yes. So along that line, that is an aspect of this thing that we do called herpetoculture. I think one of the aspects of herpetoculture in the private sector that is severely lacking, and it would be wonderful if it could come. I don't know if it was ever there to begin with. It sounds like it was there back in the 80s and the 90s, just not in a kind of a official capacity. It's like we don't, we have these big shows. We have Tinley, we have Schaumburg, Pomona, but we don't have what we have in science, which is the whole get together, present your stuff, talk about it. And that's just lacking. And a lot of people will hear that and be like, what are you talking about? But if people had a sounding board and we had that in our hobby, I think that more people would go to that than we realize. It doesn't need to be a 15-minute presentation like a scientific meeting per se, but like like the gecko symposium you were part of before Tinley. If those were more prevalent, we might be able to get. It would be celebrating the scientific side of herpetoculture, which would then give people a reason to do it. But unfortunately, the sounding board we have for the scientific side of herpetoculture is freaking Facebook. And because we have these groups, you get into the group and you promote your idea, and then that's, you get flamed. That's also what leads to these silos or nippers or whatever it is you're talking about, I think. So there's not really a place for us to promote our ideas, to put our ideas out there. We used to have things like the Vivarium magazine. Hell, even Reptiles magazine. In the mid-'90s, Reptiles magazine was completely different than what it is today. And that's one of the things that's very frustrating for me is like we just don't have a place to put this stuff to have the ability to get it out there. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's not a prevalent part of as much a prevalent part of herpetoculture in the private sector as we would all want it to be. But I also think, after that little nebulous tirade, that there is a growing portion of herpetoculture that's making decisions to get their snake out of the tub and put it in a PVC tank or PVC enclosure, give it some UVB. And, and that decision's not being based entirely off of economics because UVB's lights are expensive. They're hearing, receiving the science and responding to it. So I know just in my little friend groups, the various chats I'm in, I've seen a lot of people who 5 years ago, their whole collection was in tubs. And now that tub collection's moving more and more and more towards vivariums. And there's usually some kind of scientific backing behind it. So.
Sure. Yeah. I can get on board with that. Yeah. In regards to sharing of information, I think one of the biggest anti-science things that you can maybe think of is the idea that there are trade secrets, that you're going to keep information a secret so you can benefit from it and the other people can't. You've cracked the code. And not only do people keep those things from their, what they consider their competitors, they also actively give false information that would lead them down the wrong path. And so they're thinking they're getting this wonderful intel from an experienced seasoned breeder, and all of a sudden, they're having failure after failure, and they try the other way, and then they have success. And they're like, well, was that on purpose? Is he trying to throw me off the scent so I won't compete with him? And I mean, there's nothing more anti-scientific than, putting out false information to lead people away from the truth, So that's one of the biggest evidences of non-scientific thought within our hobby is that idea of trade secrets and leading people in the wrong direction. And that doesn't only apply to, herpetoculture. It can also apply to maybe field herping too, where people are saying, "Oh, don't look over there. You got to go over here to find them." And they're leading you in the complete wrong direction. And I get it. If you're telling all these spots or you're giving away spots that somebody asked you to keep in confidence or showed you in confidence, keep that a secret. Don't be telling the world about those, because there are unscrupulous herpers that are going to damage that. Another indication of anti-scientific, thought within the community is trashing herp sites and not taking care of the wild resources and herps that are out there, and using them more as another way to make money. If I keep this secret and I go out and collect from this spot, then I'm going to make it rich. Or somebody told me about this spot and it's a great herp spot, but I'm going to collect everything and make a quick buck off it. It's just, that's probably the most disheartening aspect, or the part of the hobby that just leaves a really bad taste in my mouth. Anytime I see a trashed environment from herpers, I'm just like, really, guys, do you really care about the stuff you're keeping, or is it just dollar signs? Despicable.
Yeah. I'm not gonna rebut that because it's true. I'll fully admit,
exactly.
Being a field biologist, conservation biologist, I've just recently got back into herping, and I love that I can do this again. And I've definitely rolled up on sites that I know people knew about, and just the tins everywhere, or the rocks are definitely not put in the footprint of where they should be. And in that situation, that's just not defendable. So,
yeah. Oh, I was reading on that note, just kind of as a side note, I was reading that Rick Shine's book, Too Many Snakes, Too Little Time. And there was, there's a chapter on the broad-headed snakes, and they're that group. What is that? I think it starts. The genus starts with a B, but the broad-headed snakes and the Stevens bandids and those guys, and venomous snakes, but they were disappearing from these habitats, and they weren't sure why. And well, they discovered that the proper type of rock that they need to thrive in this environment in Sydney, kind of where it's more temperate and cold, they needed these thinner layer rocks that kind of sat on top of other rocks and gave them a spot to thermoregulate and to find prey. And they found out that people were collecting these rocks even out of national parks for their gardens, and so they were depleting the correct rocks that the snakes needed to survive. And so what they did is they made a bunch of fake rocks with the right parameters and put a little seal so it would kind of keep the moisture under there, and set those out. And then they found that the snakes were coming back and utilizing those habitats, and the populations were improving again. And then all of a sudden they found out, these rocks aren't being used anymore. And then they noticed, there's trees growing up in front of the sun and keeping the sun from hitting them at the right time of day. And so they cut down some of the branches and showed, the snakes come back when the sun hits the rocks at right. So, they kind of made an artificial environment. And so nobody's going to collect this fake ugly rock. They're going to leave it there because it's not the real thing or whatever. And then their information led to wildlife biologists or park rangers keeping people from collecting rocks out of the parks and stuff like that. So really cool studies by Shine's group to demonstrate that. But I thought that was kind of cool. So that's not necessarily very exciting, considering the ecological damage that unscrupulous herpers can wield on the environment, but it's something that kind of shows that maybe we can help some of these.
Now flip side, using herpers, which we're under the umbrella of private herpetology now, I guess. Sure. I don't know. Is that there are plenty of field herpers that work alongside state wildlife personnel and do volunteer their time to go out with people to look for animals. I mean, here in the Mid-Atlantic region, there's a big effort right now to just simply document box turtles. It's citizen science. Yeah. And I know my crew, we did a field trip in Kentucky for crayfish, and I set the location on my phone, and every flipping box turtle we saw, which they're doing fine in that part of Kentucky. We took the pictures, we got the coordinates, we uploaded it to the website, or I uploaded it to the website. But in that regard, that's an example of where I can flat out tell you, as a field biologist, I don't care who finds the animal I'm looking for. As long as someone finds the animal that I'm looking for, I can get the data. I do care if that person that finds it is going to treat it with respect and not run away with it. That's the problem. Yeah. And I think that is an area where the field herpers, as long as they're not being shady, bagging everything, taking pictures, doing it with ethics, there's definitely a group of biologists that are going to look at those individuals as a resource and not a threat. Great example in West Virginia. I'm going to plug a guy named Jared Kane. Here in West Virginia, corn snakes were known from a single county, from two specimens that were dead on a road. And one of our herpers, who doesn't keep anything, super ethical with his collection methods, he had to prove himself to our DNR. But he went out and laid a board line where these snakes are supposed to be, and I got to go with him to the board line. He has found more corn snakes in West Virginia than anybody ever will. He's fanatical about it, and I can flat out tell you, in a state like mine that doesn't have large amounts of money that can be put towards conservation, Jared literally has quite he's writing the book on corn snakes, and now their distribution has expanded a bit. But due to the intensity of his effort, he also confirmed the perceived rarity. And if we don't have Jared, who's not getting a paycheck, doesn't have a biology degree, he is a herper, 100%. We don't have that data on that snake. And I know that that's a great example with Jared of the West Virginia DNR, the state herpetologist. He values Jared and Jared's time and effort just as much as my time and effort. On the same token, this week, West Liberty received 9 wood turtles, not box turtles, that were confiscated from some guy's backyard in New Jersey because they were heading to China as part of the black market trade in turtles. So, like, everything has there's two sides to this coin all the time. The question then is just, I think there's an ethical thing that we as herpetoculturists, field herpers, whatever, you have to just make a judgment call and decide which side of that coin you're going to be on. Because it's very tempting to produce a whole bunch of snakes that probably aren't going to live their best life, but are going to sell for $1,500, $2,500, $3,000. Like, great example with me, I have false water cobras are my snake. I have a lavender. I have 2 het lavs. And I just sit there and think, am I going to ever make these things? Because the normal falsies that I have, I went to great lengths to get as diverse genetics as I can get. And the animals that I'm producing right now they're relatively healthy. They get huge. They do everything a false water cobra is supposed to do based off what we have data for. And then I look at the lavenders, which everybody wants a lavender. I get more messages about, are you going to make lavs than my normals? And there's this part of me that doesn't know if I want to make them or not. Because when I do make them, I'm not keeping any of those things. I don't want them, But I also, as a biologist, understand that the quality of life of that animal is probably not the same as the quality of the life of the guys that are more heterogeneous. At the same time, I could be talking out my ass because I'm not a false water cobra. So, you know what I'm saying? But these are the things that I think about when I'm making my decisions. At least there's more to it than, wow, I get a clutch of 20 of these and they sell for $2,000 a piece. I just made $40,000. That thought doesn't come across my mind. In fact, there's even a part of me that's thought I might make them and sell them for like $100 just to, just to see what happens. So, but that's that.
That was actually brought up on Carpets and Coffee. Owen said, they want to debate would find having a morph for a rare species or less commonly kept species, is that good for it or bad for it? Are you bringing more of that money aspect into it versus?
Well, I kind of had this disagreement with Dr. Warren Booth on the NPR chat over there was an albino Tracier that was posted up, and I just kind of said like, get it out of here, what good is going to come of that? And Warren, probably rightly said like, well, it's not going to really mess the whole species up. And I was like, well, it's not going to do any good for it. It could mess the whole species up. I mean, there's so few of them bred, they're enough around, I suppose. His point is taken, but I just don't see the benefit. I don't see the good that comes out of it. Is somebody going to start breeding albino Tracier and then all of a sudden get an onus to be very scientific about about how Tracier are treated and bred because now there's an albino in there? Or are they going to say, oh, there's money here to be made because it's a weird big snake that's normally brown and nobody cares about, but now it's white and, it's like, cool. Okay. I like that. I don't know.
Yeah. One other, I guess, negative aspect of that, line of reasoning there is, a lot of times when people are doing citizen science, they might have, like your friend that you mentioned, they might have insights into local populations or new populations or abundance of animals. Like, just for example, we were a part of a herp group in Utah, and we were looking into how abundant milk snakes were in the state, milk snakes and mountain king snakes, because they're perceived as very, very rare and, that kind of thing. But it turns out they're not as rare as they thought. And it's just a matter of being able to find them, because they go underground when it gets dry, and it gets dry a lot in Utah. So you don't see them very often, except during, periods of rainfall or the correct weather conditions will bring them out. And so, you could kind of look at it as a negative attitude of be like, the biologists don't know what they're doing. They don't know what they're talking about. And I've been out here and I've seen 30 of them. So why should I respect their laws? Because they're based on falsehoods, so they'll collect or do things illegally that way. And actually that's how the work group came to an end. Is one of the members got arrested for poaching Gila monsters, and kind of, almost justifiably watching their habitat get paved over and going, well, they don't really care, and there's plenty of them around, and I've found, 5 this year, so I'm going to keep a couple because their habitat's going to be gone tomorrow, So it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way, but, you could go that way, and that could be a negative aspect where you're saying, these biologists don't know what they're, talking about, so I'm going to disregard the laws. And then you get busted with wood turtles in your backyard, because of a healthy population of wood turtles, and you're not harming the population, even though it says, they're vulnerable or threatened or whatever. You're like, well, I've taken 5 or 6 a year and sold them to China for good money. And,
I think it's
the population.
But I think that's that it's that part you just said that I exported them and sold them to China. That's that's kind of like,
that I guess that arrogance of saying I know better than all the professional biologists, and so I'm going to disregard what they are saying and do what I want to do with these and make money off them if I want to, just because they're again it's not anything scientific. They're just
but don't you feel that somebody who's interested in doing that is gonna they'll find the justification somewhere to reinforce what they're doing.
I guess my point is that they are doing the work. They're learning about the population. They're out there. They know them probably better. But instead of contributing, and maybe that's the fault of the Fish and Wildlife, they're not working together with citizen scientists as much as they should. And I mean, obviously, citizen scientists are a great resource, and we've got different databases based on citizen science, like iNaturalist and things. And there's always pros and cons to those databases. But for the most part, I think that's good information. If you know where something is, regardless of who found it, and you can kind of do population studies or figure out where the lines are drawn or where populations exist based on people. Now, granted, that might skew it towards where people go more often, and you have kind of dead zones where nobody's going, there's no roads, and so you don't have a good picture of a complete data set, so that makes it a little difficult. But then that can allow the biologists maybe to focus a little more in some of those lesser studied areas or private land or things like that.
With the citizen science stuff, there has to be controls built into it for it to be valid. And when you add the controls and you add data management to the endeavor, you are sometimes that is viewed by the participants as you're questioning my knowledge. Therefore, you think you're better than me, and then that leads to that whole arrogance thing. But when it's done, when the communication is open and the biologists involved are openly communicating with the people. They're letting them know why, and you have a receptive pool of people that are participating that understand why we have to do the data management the way that we have to do the data management. That's when it is as good as it gets. Now, how often that happens, that's not helping me with my point. But at the same time, though, there are plenty of examples of where where that has occurred. Once again, a lot of things going down with turtles, because I really look up to the turtle side of herpetoculture, and I don't feel like we pay enough attention to the model they have created of how private sector can get along with agency folks and can get along with scientific community and can get along with zoos. And they kind of, at least a subset of them have kind of cracked that code. So what has to happen, though, is there has to be communication on the side of the scientists, and the scientists can't come off as arrogant assholes. And I, as a scientist, I can flat out say I understand the people who get mad when they're trying to do good. You've got the best of intentions. You're giving up your time. You're spending your money to get out there because you're passionate. And then you reach out because you just want to help this animal that you really, really appreciate, love, respect, whatever. And then you get shut down because you don't have the degree or you don't have,
Dr. Dickwad.
There you go. Exactly. And the thing that is I can say this because, I am privy to the meetings and I have to do this with the endangered crayfish I was talking about. That is changing quite a bit. I think that we are finally understanding that there are not enough conservation biologists out there. And that as long as you have the public's willing to take the guidance so that the data that's being collected is good. That's what people don't understand is it's QA, it's quality control of the data. Yes, you found the crazy map turtle, which is awesome. But you also have to make sure you take decimal degrees and that you don't blast that out on the internet. So then the people that are lurking in the shadows can then swoop in and catch the turtle. So that's where,
rare turtle. Yeah.
Having the biologist oversee the effort and you as the participant following their guidance, that's the only reason why that's there. It's a quality control issue. And why is that there? Whether we want to admit it or not, because herpers have a tendency back in the day to put things in bags and buckets and then drive to the reptile show and sell it. So, and I've heard lots of people get really upset and they lash out and they get on social media and this and that when it comes to this aspect of the hobby. But the local show that I went to and still go to, I was there this past weekend, the show in Columbus, it's been busted so many times, and they just shut the door down, kick everybody out, and the fish and wildlife biologists walk through. And it's not so much an issue now, but back when I was in college, early 2000s, I distinctly remember walking through the door there and looking at all the fox snakes that were for sale for $30 and asking, I was naive as hell as a 20-year-old, and I was like, oh, are these captive bred? Yes, they're captive bred. And then I bought my pair for $50, and on the way home, I found ticks on them. And I'm like, oh, they're breeding the ticks too, and putting them on the captive bred snake. And I remember seeing blanding turtles on tables, and you don't see that now. So there is a nice change. But, you also sit and think, it could also be because they're not putting the blanding tables on the table because they're just taking those and shipping them straight to China. So, what's going on that front? So.
Do you think that's a shift in ethics, or do you just think that's a regulatory?
I think it's both. I think it depends on the person. I think some people don't want to get busted and they don't want to go to prison and they don't want to get fined and they understand these things. People are actually paying attention now and these rules have teeth. Yeah. But I also, to give credence to my side of the argument, I think there are plenty of people that want to do this right now. That's the thing that I like. It's there's just in the short window since I came back to herpetoculture in 2014. When I came back in was kind of the apex of the morph craze with lots of things, not just ball pythons. I was listening to lots of podcasts back then trying to get content, and there were a lot of conversations justifying racks. Those same people that were justifying the racks are now justifying PVC enclosures and talking about the good of PVC enclosures. And that's a result of a seed change with a particular facet of herpetoculture. There will always be the people that run out and grab every collared lizard and take them to the local show. That's never going away. I think it's disingenuous to think it's going away. And there's always going to be the morphs. But I can say one of the things that's been really interesting about our podcast with colubrids is that Matt and I don't keep the classic, morph crazed colubrids and colubroids. We're just going to say colubrids now. And we've been doing episodes on file snakes and Asiatic rat snakes and these obscure things. And when we look at like the because I'm a scientist, I look at the data. So I go into like Apple Podcasts and see how many people listen to that episode. And the episodes that are getting the most traction are either the episodes where we pick something totally obscure. So you would think it would be like, no one's going to listen to file snakes. So many people listen to our file snakes episode. And then we do these nerdy episodes where it's not that different from what I do in my herpetoculture class. Like we did the brumation bonanza. We gave it that name. You know?
That was
but that was like a lecture with swearing. Like that's basically what it was. And that got thousands of listens. So that's showing that herpetoculture is hungry for that. There's a facet of our discipline that wants that treatment. And so that's why I think there is hope. Now, whether they will outnumber the others, I don't know. But they're there. And they may not have been there in the numbers that they're there currently just half a decade ago. So. Yeah.
So, and I would agree. I mean, I think that, the more complete carpet python, that's another evidence that people are hungry for information and they're going to spend money on a book. That's everybody says print is dead, but I don't think print is dead. I think, there's plenty of people that want to have that book in their hands. And I think, we had that, like you said, we had that big push for, breeding in racks, and we're kind of shifting more towards larger caging, and we're shifting more towards information and obscure species and things. And that's really encouraging. I really hope that continues.
I just had an off the side question. So, Zach, you were talking about how agencies, DNR, Fish and Wildlife, work with citizen scientists. What really drives what they're interested in? Is it science? Is it science that's pushing new papers, new research of where these agencies should be concerned? Is that ultimately where because obviously there's probably more areas of citizen science concern that these agencies could possibly manage. So where does that come from?
Well, every state has different drivers for one thing. So like I can speak specifically for West Virginia because I've done a lot of work here, obviously. And I'm also talking more about like understudied animals. So things like crayfish or frogs are a great example. If you think about like all the biologists that we talk about, you never hear about the frog guy. If you think about it, so there's few people that are dedicating their careers to frogs, but at the same time we need to know about them. They're canaries in the coal mine, all that kind of stuff. So in that regard, it's very difficult for a government agency to dedicate a biologist completely to frogs. Okay, but frogs are a taxa that lend themselves to citizen science projects because unlike all the other herps, they sit somewhere and scream, I'm here, I'm here, I'm here. So you don't have to go out and actually find them. You have to be able to listen to them. So there's like this initiative that's called Frog Watch. It's been going on for over a decade. And USGS is the group, I believe, that came up with Frog Watch. But they came up with, the approach of setting it up was very scientific. They basically randomized the entire United States, came up with a tic-tac-toe board of, I don't know what the grid was, but it was something like 50 square kilometers all across the country. And then they looked at where all the frogs were, and then they basically generated different specific localities or different grids that needed an effort. And if they could get volunteers to sample in these different grids all the way across the country, in effect, you end up doing a census of frogs, and you're doing it annually. But here again, build into the system were quality control mechanisms. So like if you would listen to the frogs calling, if there was you first had to identify the frog. So in that instance, they created all the learning materials to give to people. So there were all the frog calls. Then you had to come up.
I saw one. Sorry, I saw one in Australia where you have an app and you just hit record and it will tell you.
That's how it's done.
It's
now.
Pretty cool.
Yeah, and then it was okay. When the frogs are calling, there's 3 different density metrics. So like if you hear one frog calling by itself, you would note the species and then put a 1. And then if you can hear enough animals where there's a space in between calls, you'd put the species in a 2. And then if it's like a deafening chorus, you'd put the species in a 3. And then you turn in that data. So in that regard, there's lots of reasons why USGS wants to do that. One is they want to get the data. Okay. 2, whether we like it or not, and we have a tendency in herpetoculture to vilify the state biologists of the world, which isn't fair, I don't think. They are also wanting to do some kind of outreach. They want their citizenry to be engaged with the animals, because if you care about the animals, when a regulation comes up to preserve them or protect them, you might be less likely to, get your pitchforks and torches out. And at the same time, they need the data. So here we have a volunteer workforce of potentially hundreds of, maybe thousands of people that are all going to be going out the same time of year. And if you can just make the data quality good, and you can actually pull that off as biologists, that can tell a lot. And since Frog Watch has occurred, they've been able to show with Frog Watch data. I don't know if it started in the late 90s or the early 2000s, but I did it when I was in a herpetology lab as a grad student. I've had my students go out and do it. But they've been able to show, we talk about climate change. Spring breeding amphibians are a great group of animals to see if climate change is really impacting them, because they historically would call the junction of spring and winter. And if that's creeping earlier and earlier and earlier in the year, you can show that winter is shortened, spring is longer, whatever. Yeah. And through Frog Watch, they've been able to clearly demonstrate with really common species that the time of reproduction for these animals is much earlier than it was just 2 decades ago. That's an example of where it's all working.
So can I ask a follow-up question? This will definitely go to you, and I'm sorry for this, but so in examples like we mentioned USGS, we talk about Fish and Wildlife. So USGS was notorious in kind of the herp community for releasing that study about large constrictors, sweeping across the United States, and then Fish and Wildlife recently down in Florida, and I think we had Ron St. Pierre on, and he kind of talked about, it's really a funding issue for the agency. And so here in both examples, I feel like you see government agencies in at least in herpers' eyes, vilifying them to fund their own agencies. So how do people reconcile that?
I'm very happy you brought up the Burmese pythons, because I have a very unpopular opinion that goes against everyone. A lot of USGS funding is internal, so they are given a pot of money. At USGS field biologist jobs, if you get a PhD and you can land one of those gigs, they're kind of the holy grail. I like teaching more than research, so I'm at my prime institution. But I can flat out tell you, lots of people who had my academic background, when they go out to get the position, they want the USGS co-op unit gig. And so they were they were tasked initially with
just because it's funded science.
Well, you have a certain amount of money.
The money's there.
I don't want to give the impression. I don't want this to be misinterpreted as you got all the money in the world.
Okay.
You absolutely, as those biologists, have to apply for funding. But if it's an initiative that that co-op unit once figured out, there can be some funds given towards it. And
gotcha. So your funding's more fast tracked.
And what was done with the pythons is what's called a MaxEnt model, maximum entropy model was done, where you basically go and you gather all this data in the field where the pythons live, and you have to go and catch the pythons. Then you get that coordinate we're talking about. Then you look at the annual climactic data there. Then you go to where berms are native to. You get the annual climactic data there. And then you pump it in, you produce a model, and the model shows the potential range of Burmese pythons. And the thing is, that paper is not garbage the way that it is portrayed. The model that was created with the algorithms in that software, and that's it. Now, the interpretation of the model, that's where you can kind of go, meh. But everybody talks about how the science was bad. It was not bad science. The interpretation of the science is where we run into some problems. The other thing with the berms issue, as far as science is concerned, and I know that I'm like totally going against my side of the argument right now, by the way, but
no, I think this is just good information. I think this is great information. So
the thing is,
rock on.
Anybody that says the berms are not impacting the Everglades doesn't understand basic ecology. There's an entire subset of mammals, marsh rabbits, raccoons, possums, bobcats, the coyotes, the gray foxes, what we call the meta mammals. They're in the middle part of the food web. It's standard issue exercise. Field biologists have been doing this for years. We drive cars. We kill animals with our cars. You drive down the road of your park, if you're a park biologist, and you have your little field notebook in your front seat, and you note every mammal you see dead on the road. And when the python showed up, those numbers started to decline, and now today they're just not there, the same numbers they used to be. The new kid in town is the python. All righty. So the pythons are eliminating that. Like the data shows, pythons show up, metamammals go away. Okay. No pythons, metamammals there. What do pythons eat? Metamammals. Okay. So that's another thing where I've heard people say, "Oh, it's a conspiracy. It's out to get it." Like, I don't think that's true. I was in the Everglades in March looking for on a herping trip. I went down to Belglade and Clewiston to the cane fields to look for Florida king snakes because I had an idea for a project, and we were road cruising up there. Marsh rabbits were freaking everywhere. I had to weave and duck with the car not to hit them. Okay. There's no berms there. We went to the Everglades and no marsh rabbits. Didn't see a raccoon. No possums. So that is there. So denying that is also when the biologists that make these regulations look at our community and go, really? We got the freaking data and you're just denying the data because you think there's a conspiracy here. Now I'm going to flip it before everybody gets mad at Dr. Zach. Because feral cats do far more damage across our country than pythons do. So there is absolute that's where when I look at it, that's where I kind of go, what the hell? The pythons are not yes, they are bad for southern Florida. Should we be bringing big constrictors into southern Florida? Probably not. We got one that escaped and it's established itself. To vilify big constrictors everywhere as the penultimate invasive species, when we literally have cats that are eating millions to billions of small vertebrates everywhere they live, and feral cats live from the Keys to Alaska. I mean, they're everywhere. That should be public enemy number one.
Ignoring that data.
And that's where I get
and taking on something that's
so when I teach conservation biology, that's literally this is in my lecture. But it's I think we do damage when we totally everybody goes straight to the pitchfork and the blowtorch when we bring up the berms. But whether we like it or not, those metamammals are gone. Okay. Now there's there's all kinds of arguments here because it's complicated. It's not black or white. There was just the paper that came out. I can't remember how this works. I think it basically, I'm going to butcher this, so I'm sorry. But I think it said, so the python showed up and they knocked down the raccoon and the possum populations, which were the main egg predators for the crocodiles. So now the crocodiles don't have the egg predators. They're an endangered species, and now the croc numbers are going up. So, you got to acknowledge that as well. But are croc numbers going up worth an ecosystem going into turmoil? It's just complicated. And that's the thing about this stuff. Right, it's not black, white. It's complicated. And you just have to take a step back, look at the data, and interpret it. But I'm totally on team cats are way more deleterious than pythons ever could be.
Sure. Well, and I mean, you can still have a bad invasive large constrictor and still have an agency that's there to fix it or regulate it or help it or whatever, still not necessarily be all anti-reptile, right? Like we can have those two things. And I think some of the issue has gone around because they've put out things that are very, anti-large constrictor in the Everglades, that means that they're anti-reptile. And I guess I see where some of that where some of that comes from with the way that they're starting to regulate, the capacity that those agencies want to be able to start to regulate species without all the red tape. And that's what they're looking for, is they're looking for bigger muscles when they want to regulate stuff. And, to everybody who's invested in that, in the reptile community, they're like, oh my gosh, that now they have, they've got a double barrel shotgun on us.
And I totally understand why people are upset with the regulations the way that they're going down. I don't want this to be interpreted that like I think that this was done well. I do not think that this was done well.
No.
But I don't think it was done well on all sides. I think that at the beginning of this whole conversation decade ago, if lucid heads would have prevailed, would have been great. Now, the agencies, I don't know if you two have been to South Florida, but South Florida is an invasive herp wonderland. Like, you can literally see
invasive, invasive everything.
Hammers,
wonderland, fish, plants.
I almost killed a van full of students driving to the Keys. There's the last red light before you get to the Keys, and I was sitting there, and I don't know what it was, but Mina birds. And they're well known for this site. They came down, were landed in the middle of the road. And I was like, "That's a Mina. That's a Mina." And in Miami, if you don't go when it turns green, you die. And sure enough, like there's cars everywhere, kids are screaming. So there's an Asiatic bird. So I just think that like it the whole thing's just a hot freaking mess.
Well, and I think that's the benefit of having something like USARK is they're representatives, and they should be the ones that have clear heads and can talk about, hey, let's think about this aspect of it. Is it a problem? Yes. Let's fix it in a way that's actually going to do something about the problem and not just restrict and keep, reptile enthusiasts from enjoying their hobby kind of thing, and so, just a kind of a plug for USARK there and that's probably to your side that USARK is a great example of, good things for the hobby and good things going on to partner with fish and wildlife agencies to make maybe common sense laws. And frankly, I mean, if you're not going to be responsible with, or the herps pose a significant threat for the environment, should we be keeping them there? Do you have to have a tegu if that kind of thing? Like, I mean, it's great to have stuff, but at the same time, what's more important, the environment around you or your right to have a big
conservation
lizard,
is all about compromise. You have to compromise. Tegus are a great example. Tegus really are, whether we want to admit it or not, they're kind of an ecological disaster waiting to happen, because this is an animal that has the ability to they're semi-endothermic, where they live in Argentina, Bolivia, Uruguay. It gets cold there. And these are generalist omnivores. Like a python is not a great invasive, but a much worse invasive is one that can literally eat plants, eggs, garbage. Like, you're not going to there's all these different filters that filter and determine whether an invasive can take hold. And when you have that generalized foraging capacity, those filters kind of go away. And I've seen, as soon as the tegu ban happening in Florida, where people's lives and income are derived from those animals, and they've obviously gone to great lengths to maintain them, I do not think it was right to just take that away. Like, that's not cool. So I'm not in favor of that. But let's say, we got these other more northern states where they're found in the wild. Like, these agency biologists are not. I've literally seen where people are like, oh, well, they took the South Carolina DNR, let them go, so then we can get rid. I don't really think that they did that. I know some people that are DNR biologists in South Carolina. They got a hell of a lot of things to do. I don't really think they're driving around with tegus in the bed of their truck, chucking them out, turning around, and being like, look. But if tegus were to get out, that's going to do so much more damage to herpetoculture as a whole. Once they become established and they're wiping out everything, and then people have 4-foot dragons in their backyard, because that's the way it's going to be interpreted. If we were to put a control mechanism on the tegus, but then compromise and say everything else is fair game, and then we get all upset. I don't know if that's the best optics.
Yeah,
like you're basically showing you're going to take all or nothing.
Yeah. And maybe that's a point for my side is we don't do well with compromise. We want to have everything and unregulated.
And that's an American thing. That's,
it's an American thing.
That's guns. That's fast food. That's ice cream. That's, at the
same time,
stop me when I run out of stuff.
You can make the argument that there's a slippery slope because the regulations were passed in Florida, and now all these other animals are slowly but surely being added to the list. And so there is some fact in that. I know but at the same time,
I guess
calmer heads can prevail. So, like one example that I always use, I tell people this all the time. West Virginia put out herp regulations, and I didn't know they were doing it. I go to meetings. I don't want to give the impression like I'm on some council, but our DNR has a herp meeting, just the people that do herpetology professionally in the state, and I have grad students doing it, so I count. And they just mentioned that herp regs were going to be changing in West Virginia. That was the extent in the meeting. And then I'm sitting at my desk one day, and then sure enough, holy hell, they changed. And one of the things that changed was you are not allowed to have any native species of reptile and amphibian in West Virginia, period. And and so I looked at that and was like, I laughed because I know the people that have to enforce this. And was like, you just banned corn snakes, man. That's next to ball pythons and Lord knows what that's a common snake. They're in every freaking Petco across the state. And so I had calm head. I didn't like rant and rave, but I called up the biologists who are field biologists. They're not herpetoculture people. And I explained as a herpetoculture person, you don't know what you just did. Because you
just turned a 5-year-old into a felon.
Your life's going to become hell because you're going to start acquiring all these corn snakes. Maybe you put in there something like what I think it was New Jersey. One of the New England states has I think it's New Jersey because they have corn snakes there. You can't have a natural phenotype corn snake, but you can have one that has like albino eyes. So here we can have our cake and eat it too. If you really like Okeetees, you're out of luck because that's a normal phenotype. But if you like Snows or Motleys or whatever, okay, we can have corn snakes. So and I talked to them, and sure enough, it's been changed now to where with corn snakes, mutants are okay. You just can't have the normal phenotype. Like that is the way this should work. But it worked because I didn't come in like a freaking freight train saying like, give me back all my snakes. Like I didn't do that. I explained the side of the coin, and I used science and herpetoculture to,
and common sense.
To get that.
And threw in there the rare way that a morph can unfuck something.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, there you go. There you go. And the other thing was, it was also kind of interesting to give this argument of like, I'm also lightening your workload because you're the guy that has to go out and get all the candy cane corn snakes. And so, and there for a little while they were doing that, and they kind of realized that, oh no, we can't do this. And so, it has changed. That I think is a model for how this could happen. Whether that's going to happen or not remains to be seen. And unfortunately, we live in a world of all or nothing. And compromise is very, very hard to achieve. So,
support USARC so we can get compromise in our hobby. Good compromise, yeah. Well, I don't know. I think this is a good discussion. We've brought up some good topics. We haven't hit on a lot of things, and maybe we can do part 2.
This could have like up to part 30.
Yeah. Oh yeah. There's a lot of pros and cons in the hobby for sure, and hopefully this has given the listener some something to think about, and I would definitely suggest that you really think about your actions and how they're impacting our hobby, and if they're just plain selfish, or if you're using the hobby to promote reptiles and get people excited about them and the knowledge out there, and you're protecting the environment and being a responsible herper, It's good things. Those
it's
are
a good
things.
Look.
If you're not lined up with that, then probably rethink your actions. Like try again, try better.
Yes.
But yeah,
That's what I
cool.
have.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on, Zach.
No worries.
It's always a good.
I'll come on
discussion
again
with
anytime you
yourself.
have me.
Yeah. Great stuff. Okay, sounds good. That's impressive considering you've got your own podcast, a bunch of students, your family, and your captive animals.
This is like an hour and a half out of my week
it.
that I can. This is why Matt and I do our podcast, because it's just like 2 hours of focus on one thing. So, that's kind of
it's therapeutic.
Yes,
isn't it?
it's needed. So there you go.
For sure. All right. Well, of course, as always, a big shout out. Well, except last week, big shout out to Morelia Pythons Radio Network and for all the great podcasts, including Clubrids and Clubroid Radio, for hosting us, and thanks to the Almighty Podfather and the Mackenwookie for
there we go.
all they do. Check out all their stuff on social media and check out the other podcasts that are on the network. All right. Well, thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you again next week for another edition of Reptile Fight Club.
Until next time, this is your neighborhood
Fight Club.